Hey guys, let me get started so that those of you who are like me, who can only deal with this number of people for a short amount of time, we'll get started so that we can get going. Alan Knight is the proctor. He will keep me in bounds today.
Yeah.
I'm
the proctor-menologist. I just thought, oh wait, that was just boom.
Dr. Alan Knight again.
It's not working today, is it?
So let me just take a moment. I'm Jeremy Norwood. I'm very thankful to be able to be here to present on this topic with focus. This is sort of a spin-off of one of the points from a presentation I did at the Human Trafficking Conference last fall. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about this today. For those of you who don't know who I am, just real quick, I teach up in the Department of Sociology, Global Studies, and Criminal Justice. And this is my 9th year here. Also do cross-cultural kind of stuff with the cross-cultural department and teach some core classes. So again, I'm thankful to be here and to be able to talk about this. This is going to be sort of, this is something I'm sort of working through personally. And so this is going to be somewhat reflective, but I'm also going to attempt to sort of tie it back into what we're doing on campus with regard to our work against human trafficking. So that's sort of where I'm headed. So let me take a moment. I always sort of open with a word of prayer. Let me take a moment and pray, and then we'll get started, okay? Lord Jesus, we thank you for this day. We thank you for focus and for all the work that Robbie and Jack and Alan and others on the CPLA committee have done to bring this topic to our attention and to bring people here that are really well-versed and well-written and well-researched in terms of these ideas. Help us to wrestle through some of these things and to better understand what it means to be a person, what it means to be a human being, and how that relates to how we treat other people, how we put our faith into practice in the world around us, Lord, and how we live out the unique calling you've given to us, Lord God. I thank you for all these students, Lord, and as with the students that have gone before them, Lord, I thank you that you continue to do great work in their lives, and I'm very thankful that I can even learn about some of those things and help support them in the best way possible. And so I thank you and I praise you for this day. May you be glorified through what we discuss and wrestle with today. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a little bit of discussion about this coalition working against human trafficking. As some of you know, every January, or most Januaries, about 7 over the last 9 years, I take 3 weeks and I'm a part of the great cross-cultural program here, and we take those 3 weeks and we go to Cambodia and we study the issue of human trafficking amongst many other things. So we deal with, the 5 major social institutions, but human trafficking is something that's come up as a result of some of those trips, okay? We actually had a group about 5 or 6 years ago that came back and started asking some questions, okay? Those questions sort of surrounded, we had an experience in Cambodia where we visited one of the red light districts, and we took some time to sort of go through that area and learn as much as we could about what was going on there. And really had some very eye-opening experiences. I always tell students it's one thing to hear about something, it's another thing to read about it, it's another thing to see something on film, but it's also another thing to experience it. And I think that there's sort of these levels of awareness, maybe, that you sort of get a sense of, okay? We walked through a red light district, and as it went that time, there were a couple of us guys, and basically somebody who was there sort of trying to sell young women, basically offered us sex, right? Which was incredibly uncomfortable, and on a lot of levels. And that sort of stuck with us, and it sort of resonated with us because we were like, we've read about this, we've heard about this, we've learned about this before, we've seen these documentaries or whatever. But for somebody to actually say, okay, do you want girls? Here's how much they are. Here's where you go. How old do you want? And all these things is just at another level, just downright dark, right? And so what happened was is we went to some different non-governmental organizations that year. We went and learned more about from some really amazing people within the country about what goes on with that. And then we came back to the United States, and there was this awkward, you know, with this group, it just depends on the group, but there was this what do we do moment, right? And so 3 or 4 of them pull me into a classroom upstairs, and they're like, well, listen, we've been doing some research on what this looks like in Jackson. And I'm like, oh great, right? Because we're in this room, and they've got stuff pulled up on the computer, and they're looking, we're like, there's these windows up here, right? Which Alan and I always sort of familiarize ourselves with each other when we walk by. But anyway, we were, you know, we're looking at some of these images in these chat rooms and some of these things with regard to some of the venues in Jackson County itself. Okay? And then these students started asking questions like, okay, you know, Norwood, we don't necessarily feel called to Cambodia, but what can we do about this here? Right? And me being the skeptical professor that's working on a completely different dissertation topic is like, yeah, that's really interesting to consider. Like, so what should we do? Like, completely caught off guard, right? Well, over the next couple of years, we actually had a focus series on human trafficking where it was people from all over are coming in and getting involved in things like this. We've had a couple of conferences, and we're at a point now where we've got some really unique things going on that, FYI, if you want to pray for it, these things, then we'll take all the prayer support we can get, okay? But just to give you an idea, where we're at this semester with this is we're planning for next year's conference, okay? But also next week, Tuesday, February 24th and then March 10th. Okay, and you can feel free to come and be a part of this if you want. I mean, as long as you're not too unruly. But if you want to come and be a part of this, these are 2 days. We're actually going to be in front of the Jackson City Council with a package of legislation that we've worked with the prosecuting attorney's office and the vice mayor, Derek Dobies. We've worked with them to try to put together some legislation that attempts to address certain concerns we have with what we would call sexually explicit businesses in Jackson County. Well, particularly Jackson City, but ultimately Jackson County. Okay, so next Tuesday, they're going to read the bills, and then during March 10th, which I know you guys probably have all kinds of great plans for spring break. My kids are in school, so I don't have those kinds of plans, right? But this is during spring break. This is when we're going to go before City Council, both times at 6:30. I put 6 in my calendar just to give myself some time, but 6:30, make sure I find it and I get there on time and everything. We're going to go before the City Council. Now, another thing that's going on you can really pray for is that one of the agencies that's really strategically positioned to address issues like human trafficking in Jackson, AWARE, Inc., which is here in Jackson, we're actually in the process of reviewing applications for the next executive director. Right? Which if if you're interested in what that looks like and want to be involved in praying through those things, then that would be great. But that person would actually be in a really strategic position, both within that organization and within the community, to be a part of dialogue regarding anti-trafficking, domestic violence issues, child sexual abuse issues, and stuff like that too. Okay? And then the other thing that's been going on is we've had some folks that have approached us that have said, listen, we're really encouraged by what you're doing. And this will be my segue into the first part of this, which is the working with or working against piece. But we've had some people approach us that are interested from a funding perspective to say, like, what's a way that we can get some sort of funding so that we don't have to worry about making ends meet for the conference every year, or for a 5K, 10K every year, or for something bigger than that, Lord willing, right? So we're trying to work through even the funding pieces of this too. We've had some really good partnerships. Like, for example, the last couple of years, the cross-country track folks that have said, for every sort of point we get, we're going to raise money to help support your conference. Or the Set Free group at the Free Methodist Church has said, we'll cover the t-shirts for the conference, which are made by former victims of human trafficking in a small village in Cambodia, which is the subject of Gary Haugen's Terrify No More book, if you guys have ever read that before. We visit there every January, yeah? So we were trying to support these different causes as a result of that. Now, I wanted, the point of my message, and please understand that I'm working through this now, okay? This isn't something I claim to be perfect at. This isn't something that I'm trying to tell you. I mean, let's help each other and converse with each other when we deal with these things. But the reason why I titled it like this is because when we first started this work at human trafficking, it's very difficult to know who you can work with and who you can trust. I personally tend to be one of these people that I don't trust others fairly well, okay? And that's because of a combination of things. It's because sometimes I feel like I have this idea of the way things should go, and if other people don't necessarily, they're not at that same part, or that same standard or whatever, I have a hard time like being sort of like cooperative. If I feel like, you know, it's kind of like my way and I have this idea of how to do things. Have you ever worked in groups in class? Have you ever done that before? So have you ever done group work with other people and you're like, yeah, I don't know, like, I'm not sure if I work together with people in class, like I was one of these type A students where I was like, if I do my work with a group, I want to make sure I've got the last set of eyes on this, right? Because my grade's on the line, my time that I put into this is on the line, and so on and so forth. And that's sort of the genesis behind some of this. The trust issue is, for me is, you know, who can we work together with that I quote unquote trust? And part of the rest of that also is, if you're involved in some of these justice projects, sometimes, I'll never forget one of the stories that the director of the IGM office told me in Cambodia, or told us in Cambodia. They used to have this director in Cambodia that we would go and spend like hours talking to this guy. He would just block out a chunk of time and talk to us about their anti-trafficking operations in Cambodia. And obviously there's confidentiality and security, and you've got to sign off and you've got to do all these things. But he would have these really frank conversations where he would say, you know what, we've had cases where our investigators are also being approached by folks that are in these brothels that are trying to pay them off, right? And they're threatening their lives and doing other things like that. So when I go into this, I don't know that some of the data or research we have, I don't know who I can share it with, right? And so if you talk to anybody who's done research or has done some of these projects with us, we used to go out, we used to watch these massage parlors. So we used to go out there and we used to monitor their activities from a safe distance, okay? And so we would see what are they doing, like how many people are going in there every night, how does this work, when people leave, what do they do, where do they go, those types of things. And we've had some cases where that's been incredibly intimidating sometimes, because these places make a lot of money, and not just for massages, okay? So, for example, there's a church, a local church group that thought one of the things that they could do is pray. So they drive into the parking lot in these places, and they would sit there and they would pray together. Well, almost always in these, which is a great idea, by the way, pray, okay? Pray as much as you can, just don't do it right on their premises, okay? But this group was actually, there's almost always sort of the muscle. So they have somebody that they call that will come and try to intimidate you. So they'll say, what are you doing here? Why are you here, right? And a lot of times people will just leave if they're not there to go in and get a massage or whatever, okay? So the trust thing, to get back to this trust thing with working, it's one of those things where you don't know who can have access to the information because you don't know if there's somebody that's going to share something that you know. Does that make sense? So you don't know who you can always trust. Now, one of the things that I want to sort of share with you today, and this has been God working on my heart, okay? Because I hear about stories in the developing world. I even read about stories in the United States where you have cops or you have law enforcement that are supposed to be putting an end to some of these things, but sort of they're on the take, right? And so for a long time, it's been difficult for me to know who do you trust, who do you know, like who can you work with, and it isn't just an anti-human trafficking thing, but it could be anything. any social project or issue you're working on, right? You want to know who you can trust and who you can't and why, right? So one of the things that happened recently that is sort of broken me of this, and one of my key lessons to you is that God will continue. If you're like me, if you're skeptical, if you're sometimes pessimistic, if you don't know who you can trust, expect that God will work on your heart and show you those things, okay? I had a class, a special topics class a year ago, right? We started writing letters, 2 years ago. We started writing letters all over. We wrote letters to the congressman, we wrote letters to the prosecuting attorney's office. We did all this kind of thing to put pressure on those who are in these positions of power, right? Wrote all these letters, and in law, when you tick someone off, we call it, sometimes we refer to it as like, you draw blood, okay? Now, it's not always a good thing, but like, arguing isn't always a bad thing either. So we would get these phone calls like, why are you sending us all these letters? Why do you always call our office, right? So we tick them off, but also what? They know we exist, and they know what we're interested in and what we're passionate about. This is sort of like, you know, trying to create, if those of you who have been in my class before, Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, you're trying to create some sort of tension, okay? That raises awareness and focuses sort of people's ideas. Like, politically, this is something that some people are interested in, right? So we started writing letters, we started calling, and I would just tell students, listen, you do the best you can, you don't have to make a perfect phone call. We would revise the letters and everything, but we would have people all over the community sign off, and we'd mail them, and we'd mail them, we'd mail them. We'd call, and we'd call, and we'd call. Finally, okay? One of the areas that I've had a hard time sort of navigating through is law enforcement. Okay? One of those sectors that I think, well, I don't know who I can trust here. Okay? Well, after we send all these letters, we get a phone call from law enforcement. Okay? Well, I get an email and then later a phone call. You know, how can we address this? How is this something? Don't assume when you find out or you become more aware of a social issue that everybody knows about it. Okay? In fact, the people you think might know about it, this is something my wife always tells me. She's like, Jeremy, why are you getting so riled up about this right now? Not everybody knows what you know. And it's like, yeah, but they should know. She's like, but they don't. Right? So don't assume, okay, many of us here, we're very privileged, really. Like, you may think, oh, I'm a college student, I don't have a lot of money, you know, whatever. But you are privileged in the sense that you have access to an education. You have a place where you can learn. Gary Britton, who's, you know, from the business school, is one of my mentors in college, always said, college students never cease to amaze me. They pay so much for an education, but gripe when you try to give it to them, right? You're in a unique set of circumstances or situation where you can learn about these things. But when you go home, you go to your church, you go other places, don't always assume that people know what you know about autism, about human trafficking, about clean water, about any sort of issue that you feel like God's drawing you to. Don't assume those things. You don't always know that, okay? So think about platforms where you can build healthy conversation. Not where you're preaching at somebody, not where you're mad at the Thanksgiving dinner table, like where you can have creative conversations with people and you can engage them with that without having to act like you're sort of that Christian who knows everything and has to tell everybody how to live their lives, right? You should do those things, but just be smart, okay? Law enforcement gets a hold of us and says, okay, listen, how can we help? We understand that there's this issue of human trafficking. So about over the span of a year, we meet with the prosecuting attorney's office and share a little bit and share a little bit and learn a little bit more about their perspective. So here's the other thing, okay? You may say, law enforcement, there's something wrong with law enforcement here. We've had those places in Jackson for centuries, okay? Not centuries, decades. My little one, Liam, my little one, the 3-year-old, you guys have probably seen him run around on campus. That's his favorite song, Centuries. All of us. Horrible parents, I know. So anyway, for decades, for 30 or 40 years, we've had these places in Jackson. Law enforcement must be in on this. Law enforcement. Well, they call us and they say, hey, listen, how can we, bless you, how can we work together to do this? So all of a sudden, I'm just like, can I trust people? I don't know. Okay? But this is part of the working with or working against. If you're going to do something with regard to human trafficking, with regard to, child abuse, with regard to domestic violence, with regard to autism, with regard to whatever, who are those folks that you need to develop these relationships with? Okay? Homelessness in Jackson, right? What are you going to, how are you going to do that? Who do you need to get to know? Okay? So the prosecuting attorney's office over the summertime, I'm out playing with my kids. Okay? I can't wait for those warm days again. And the summertime, right? I'm out playing with my kids and I'm checking my email on my phone. Jerry Jarzinka, right? And you can play and check your email, okay? So, Jerry Jarzinka, Professor Norwood, we'd really like to talk more about this human trafficking issue. On the one hand, I'm like, good. On the other hand, I'm like, but aren't these people the reason why this has always happened and they're not doing anything? So, how do you negotiate that, right? I'd like to say that the detectives that we met in the process were excited to hear about the fact that we sat out and learned about massage parlors. They weren't. That's an investigative function. Was I eager to say, hey, if somebody was investigating these places, we wouldn't have to? No, I never said that. Did I think it? Maybe, but I didn't say it. Right? But nothing can happen without law enforcement, okay? So working with as opposed to working against, okay? Who are some of those people that can partner with you? Because here's the deal, I have no idea what it looks like to be a cop. I have no idea how to investigate some of these issues. I have no idea what it means to prosecute that case. I mean, I'll never forget the former prosecutor invited me to a conference over in West Michigan. Drove over with him, drove back, and we went back and forth and back and forth. It was awesome. You can't do those things in academia because people think you're mean. But when you're talking to an attorney, you can have a conversation where you're debating back and forth and you're just at each other the whole time, and at the end you're like, oh, that was a great conversation, you just talk about the next thing. If you do that in academia, then people get mad. They're like, you're not collegial, or you're not nice. And it's like, it's not. Anyway. Law enforcement, okay? The first sort of sector that sort of opened up, and it was an answer to prayer, really. For him to email and say, hey, can we get a task force put together? Now, politically, is he saying that we want to do something about this? We want this to be out in the media, we want people to see that we're doing something like this? Sure he is. But I don't care. It's political. We're still raising awareness, right? He's on board. If anybody's going to do anything about anti-trafficking or to fight against human trafficking, it has to be to some degree the boots on the ground. Okay? I'm a college professor. I can't go investigate, kick down the door, do whatever I need to do. Okay? I know sometimes it appears that I could. That's a complete joke. Come on, look at me. It's a joke. All right? So, other sectors in terms of working with or working against. Okay? There are also, and I don't, Dr. Lewis is in the room, and he and I, we know each other, so this isn't, but I tend to be skeptical somewhat. As a sociologist, you can't get trained often without becoming skeptical of the private sector. And I think if you're in business, there's also this equal sort of skepticism about sort of those sociology people, right? So you've got, private free market, you've got, sociology sort of sounds a lot like socialist, so that's always sort of how we're viewed, right? Yeah. But one of the neat things that's also come out of this, and that we see in Cambodia all the time, and I had a couple of these guys, Tyler Baker, you know, Stephen Murphy up here, and then, you know, Johnny Easlick and some Courtney Appleby and some other folks. And we've had business majors come on that trip. Particularly this year, these folks were great, okay? And what you often see when you see the anti-trafficking part is that you see, okay, you've got law enforcement getting involved to do the investigation, okay? They bring a case to somebody that serves as like a prosecuting attorney who determines whether or not they can charge or whether or not they're going to pursue the case. And then at some point, you've got to have social workers involved. Now, social workers and sociologists, we're like cousins. Like, we have these conversations, you know, this is no big deal. I mean, this is something we talk about all the time. Social workers provide the aftercare, right? They figure out, like, they try to figure out what sort of problems people are having and how to best address those, okay? But where it's an amazing model, some of these organizations that have worked it out, though. You've also got to have young entrepreneurial minds that partner alongside, because you've got to figure out if these people are in abject poverty. Not everybody that's involved in this is in abject poverty or whatever, but poverty is one of the major factors, okay? How do you address the poverty question in a country or in a locality where there aren't a lot of other opportunities, okay? So a lot of the times you'll have people that'll have these young, very entrepreneurial minds from gaming that'll come on the trips and say, what are some really unique ways that we can partner with others to create socially sustainable startup businesses or NGOs, okay? What are some skills that we can use what are some skills we can hone in on to train people, okay? What are some ways in which we can empower them to get some sort of sustainable livelihood to where they don't revert to what they may have always sort of known? Does that make sense? So that's sort of, this is my second. There's two prongs to this one, okay? But I'll say business, okay? Or I'll say maybe private sector. And this is what sort of the problem is when we generalize about people, regardless if it's those socialist sociologists or those free market business people or those, you know, whatever. I mean, when we generalize, we forget about the fact that oftentimes there's some business folks doing very amazing things to help provide jobs for marginalized populations. Okay? We forget that oftentimes there are sometimes sociologists that are trying to initiate this change on, you know, in partnership with small business owners, okay? And so when we view it through a stereotypical lens, right, we lose sight of the fact that we're much stronger working together than we are in our own little silos. Silo is sort of like one of these metaphors where we all work in our schools, our departments, our different parts of campus without talking to one another. Because as good little Americans, we sort of are competitive and we want what's best for ourselves and we want to determine those things without feeling like there are ways in which we can be more whole or more complete if we work together. Does that make sense? And so when we work with, okay, part of this, and here's another thing, here's another example, right? Later today, I'll meet with an individual who's very interested in sort of partnering in terms of supporting our conference, okay? Now, the first time this individual, I heard this individual is going to come to the conference, I was terrified, okay? I was scared. I was like, oh my gosh. I started feeling very intimidated. Like, what if something goes wrong? Like, you know, is my job at stake? You know what I mean? It's like, so, you know, we're often very intimidated by folks that may be in other roles or positions in society that we feel like, you know, oh my gosh, this person is on the board of trustees, or this person is, you know, the head of this company, when really they're people too, okay? And they have a desire to be able to partner with certain issues to move them forward and so on and so forth as well. So my initial thing was, right? So I could imagine, you know, Lizzie, like when case is going on and word gets out, oh my gosh, President Ellis is coming up to see what's going on with case. It's like, whoa, like, oh my gosh. Or like somebody calls Josh Riddick and says, hey, we want you to come by to talk about, you know, the work that you're doing in Jackson. Or, you know, somebody goes up to, you know, whomever about whatever project they're working on and says, hey, can you come and talk to me? I don't know about you, but my first feeling is like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do, you know? You start getting a bit nervous, you doubt yourself, you think like, oh, you know, is there something I did wrong? That's always the first thing that comes to me, like, you know, the principal's coming or you're getting called into the office, you did something wrong. You know, the other day I saw President Ellis and he said, hey, I talked to the city manager. What's his name? And immediately I thought, you know, oh my gosh, like I've been bugging that guy too much about something, you know. And he goes, no, he goes, he was so impressed with the work you all are doing in Jackson. And I said, I looked at him, I said, really? You know, like you're not trying to sugarcoat this? Because I've been after this guy to train city inspectors for a long time, right? He says, no, he's really encouraged by the work that you're doing, right? So think about this, though. I mean, think about it. This isn't just they're not just coming to sort of like look over your shoulder. They're coming so that President Ellis can tell donors about the amazing work that the CASE program is doing. Or about how these students in Jackson are going to Jackson to try to minister to the homeless population. Or about how these students who lead Action Jackson, right, or go on a spring break missions trip or so on and so forth, okay? People want to be able to give and to be a part of things that are changing people's lives for the better, right? And so when you deal with folks that may be in business, they may be in politics, this was another one, we were bugging Congressman Walberg, emailing, calling, whatever. They call us up, hey, we want to do a forum on human trafficking. And I'm like, excuse me? Like, okay, we're like, okay, when? Well, we'd like to do it such and such dates. It was during exam week. You can imagine how excited I was. So I was like, oh, but he's the U.S. Congressman. He represents our district to Washington, D.C. Just making that clear. Some people are like, Washington State? But, so am I going to make time during exam week so that, and again, you guys, I'm not any more positive about politics than a lot of you are, right? But partnering with people to help get the word out, to be aware of this. And so I've been able to, a little bit at a time, learn to trust, learn to work together, because there can be some ways in which folks from these other areas are seeing this, and they can bring things to the movement that I could never do, okay? As somebody who's trained in law and in sociology, I don't know what this looks like to do a startup with this project. You know, I don't know what that looks like necessarily. You know, I was an undergrad business major here, but like, you know, I've never had an opportunity to run a business or to start a business or to start anything like that, you know. I'm not trained sort of ministerially, so I'm not ordained or anything like that. So I don't like, if you were to ask me to sort of try to meet somebody's spiritual needs, like, I don't know how to do that as well as somebody who's ordained would. Okay? I'm not a social worker. My wife's a social worker, so I kind of act like I know something about that sometimes, because I hear all kinds of stories from her and all kinds of things. But like, you know, and I can go to her with questions all the time, but I can't provide the care or do a needs assessment or figure out which agencies would be good for this person to know or to partner with, because they need social support to succeed in life. The social support a lot of times we sort of take for granted, right? So in a lot of cases, like, you know, this idea of working with or working against is, it's okay for something to be an issue that you're passionate about and that you work on, okay? That's okay, right? But I feel like the movement only gets stronger as you pull other folks on board and they can help teach you about different ways. I mean, I can tell you this year, you know, I'd like to say as a professor that's gone to Cambodia 7 times now, I know everything about Cambodia. But I'll tell you, one of the things that's amazing to me is how some of the folks this year pulled together mini lectures that taught me things, and all the reading I've done and talking I've done to people. We need to be teachable, okay? And part of the working with piece is working with people, okay, that you initially may feel like you can't trust or don't understand, or maybe your odds are you're sort of working at odds with each other. but you need to be sort of on the same page. You need to be able to work together in order to see the entire picture and how this works. Because it's so much bigger than you, okay? And it can be so discouraging to tackle some of these issues, even in your own localities, without help and encouragement from other people, okay? Now the second prong of this, okay, is funding-wise, honestly, okay? So a lot of you that have worked on different social issues, you know at some point you're going to have to go and you're going to have to figure out some sort of funding if it's going to be sustainable. So that could mean you're applying for a grant, which is a whole fun, encouraging process. No, I mean, some of the things that you don't enjoy in life actually teach you the most. So don't back down from those things. But you know, you can apply for funding, you can build relationships with corporations and partnerships. I know at Aware in the few months that I've been able to serve on the board there, I mean, we have some great corporate donors in Jackson that without them, we wouldn't be able to provide the services we do to victims of domestic violence. Okay? So to assume that like every business is just in it to make money and live in big houses and all these types of things, you know, that may be true to some degree, but it's not the entire picture. Okay? There are a lot of folks that make a lot of money that are very generous in how they give that money away and things like that. And they may be interested in the issue you're working on or what you want to do. So the second part of this, and here's the deal, you guys. How many of you in high school had to sell something? You remember? Girl Scout cookies. I mean, I ate a lot of those. I didn't sell a lot of those, but like, especially those ones with like the caramel, chocolate, and coconut on them. The Samoas. Sweet Lord Jesus. Okay, I've got to stay focused now. How many of you in high school or somewhere along the road, you had to fundraise or sell things? Baseball, any sort of team, whatever. Probably one of the most fun things you've ever done, right? No. I don't like asking people for money. I've never liked asking people for money. In many ways, that flies sort of in the face of that strong American notion that I have, you know? I can do this on my own, right? With the coins I find in couch cushions. But honestly, what's been really humbling and encouraging to me is when people, I think if you do something and you do it well, people will approach you. And they'll want to be a part of it. And they'll want to say, hey, you know, I really noticed this project you're working on. Like, is there any way, do you need people to jump on board and help support you and help you with coordinating this, that, or the other thing? And initially, you know, that Americanness, that bold, rugged, northern Michigander in me, said, no, I'm good by myself, thank you. Do this all on my own, as if I'm not married and have I don't have 4 children, right? And anything else to do, right? But I would encourage you, think about ways that you can develop those partnerships, where you can raise awareness in the community, where you can put yourself in a venue or a situation where you can meet people. And it's okay to have those conversations, because it's not just about you. There are other people that might want to get on board, and they may have some pretty good ideas. And by the way, they might have money too that always helps. Okay? So the private sector business thing has been hard too. All right. I don't know how to classify this last one, so I'm just going to be upfront with it. Okay? Church. In many ways, the folks we have the hardest time working with are just like us. And they're the people that in a lot of cases are trying to do the same things we're doing. And because we're so passionate and insistent on things, we feel like we've got a way to do it, and they're trying to sort of like compete and do these sorts of things, okay? This is like trying to have really personal conversations about something that matters to you with the people closest to you. Sometimes it's the hardest thing ever, isn't it? You've got strong opinions, you're very independent, you want to be able to do these things in and of yourself, and some of those things, okay? And part of surrendering, and this is a way that God's been working on me, is trying to build that coalition actually means working together with people who may not always believe the same thing that you do, But ultimately, this is up to God, and it's not about you. It's not about your plan. Okay? And so when I say the church, okay, not only is it difficult initially to get folks, and I think about Dr. King when he talks about, church leaders saying this is the social gospel with which we have no concern. Okay? It's my firm belief that the church has got to be, if we're going to sit here and gripe and complain about how many tax dollars the government takes and how the government's too big and inefficient and all these types of things that I know none of us do. But anyway, if we did, okay, then what's the alternative? Okay? It's not the government. It's not through your tax dollars. What is it? At some point, okay, if you believe the church is the answer, then at some point, you got to come alongside church folks and say, hey, listen, this is an idea I have. Okay? In Chicago, we visit a community that's one of the model Christian community development. It's the home of the CCDA, which is the Christian Community Development Agency. And it's a community where Coach Gordon and John Perkins over the years in his time sort of liaising with them, and other leaders, Phil Jackson, not the former coach of the Bulls, but he's a youth pastor. These guys have worked together, and they've actually, through the church and other sort of partnering organizations with the church, applied for funding for a medical center, a job creation center, affordable housing authority, and these types of things, right? So to what degree can you have those conversations within the church, okay? And I'll be honest with you, your generation, you can have those conversations, okay? A lot of you, you get very interested in some of these issues, and I would encourage you, go to your church, have those conversations. Talk to the different pastors that are involved and say, I had this idea about serving the homeless in Jackson. I had this idea about starting a small business that could help sort of employ people that go through the interfaith shelter. Go to your churches and start talking about these things. Okay, there's a church that we've partnered with a little bit that helped bring Jim Martin last February. Okay, they have a counseling center that deals specifically with domestic violence and child sexual abuse in their church over there. Okay, so what are some ways that the church, if you don't want the government to do it, if you don't want to pay taxes, if you don't want to worry about big government, okay, and all these types of things, what are some ways? I always encourage people, I'll give the government. Like whatever you're giving tax-wise, live your life in a way in which you give more to other things than you give the government. Okay? Make that change. Like, support some of these things you want to be a part of. Meet people within these networks. And don't give up. I mean, you can't give up hope with the church. Okay? We just sat in on a lunch with Christian Smith, who was the guy who was the chapel speaker today, right? This guy's, he's one of the leading scholars in his area on, religion and society, right? He's one of the most prominent sociologists that studies religion, and actually youth, okay? But one of the things that came out of that conversation, with him, is sort of this idea, is we sort of try to take back as Christians this idea of personhood and humanity, right? It starts with the church, okay? One of the other things in our conversation is sometimes it's very easy to point out, oh, as the church, what don't we do? Okay? And you should have that in your mind. But don't ever forget what the church has done and what the church is doing. Okay? One of the distinctions that I try to make in class is the difference between being critical and being cynical. Nothing wrong with being critical. Okay? Especially, I don't know, some of you guys may find, you look prophetically in the Bible, and there's room for criticism. You look at Jesus. Jesus was incredibly critical, at times, particularly the religious people. Okay? But criticism becomes cynicism when all you do is talk about everything that's wrong, but you never do anything. Okay? And so you can be critical while understanding these are the great things that my church is doing. Maybe we can get involved with this. you know, these are the great, you know, there's a gap here with this church. I wonder if I could talk to this outreach pastor or this serve pastor about this, right? There may already be people doing it. You might just need to sort of network and link up with them, okay? But it becomes cynicism when we get so discouraged, so frustrated, and we talk and we criticize and whatever and don't do anything, okay? And so I would encourage you, okay, with some of these social issues, because the churches, you do need to be those voices in your churches. You need to ask why the church isn't doing more with this or with that, right? In a constructive way. But do it in a way that invites conversation, allows you to partner, and it allows you, instead of working against, I mean, I know there's a lot of you guys that are athletes, or at least you were athletes in some way, shape, or form in high school or whatever in here. I know a lot of you guys do college sports, or you're involved athletically somehow. I was always taught, like, you know, growing up in athletics, you're always sort of competing against another component, or another opponent, or another team, right? I've had to be careful with that, okay? Because when I get in that mindset, I get very focused on winning for whatever's best for me or my team, and I forget about some of these ideas of working with as opposed to working against, right? So if there's an issue that you're interested in, right, I would encourage you, you don't know what you're interested in, you don't have any idea. I've never really had a point at which I've prayed, you know, Lord, you know, show me the ways in which I can get involved with you know, living my faith out in a practical way, okay? Where he hasn't shown me something, okay? Now, it might not be like right away, like when you text somebody, they text you right back. Or like, you get a coffee, and it tastes yummy. Like, there's some delayed reaction to some of this stuff. Like, it isn't, God's not on our sort of instant gratification time frame, okay? So sometimes you got to be patient, right? But pray about that. Lord, what's a way that I can get involved, right? Talk to a professor. I'm interested in this. How can I be involved? Okay? There are all kinds of organizations all on campus that you can get involved in, that you could give back to. Okay? It could be through your sports team. It could be through an already existing organization. It could, you know, whatever. Pray through these things. Seek God out. What is it that he's calling you to do? Okay? And then partner with other people. Learn more. You're in college, people. You're in college. We're going to make you do work and read lots of different things. Make it worth your while in all the money you're paying for it, okay? Allow God to use this time to empower you, okay? Allow God to use this time to partner with other students, to get to know people in Jackson, to get to know people in your home communities, okay? My lesson today, don't be afraid of those things. Don't be afraid of the people. Who are the groups of people that you have trouble trusting? Who are they? What do they look like? What sorts of jobs do they have? What are the things that they do to frustrate you? Okay? Because I'll tell you right now, if you get involved, you're going to have to work with folks like that. Right? Not to mention those commandments about loving your neighbor, people you perceive as your enemy, those types of things. Christian outreach. Ring a bell, anybody? Or just stare at me. No, it's going to come, okay? You're going to need to work with folks that you don't always feel like are on the same page. But how do you do that, and how do you do that well? And I'm working through that right now, folks. So that's a confession. This is me in process right now, okay? I think if you do that, if you're faithful, and if you're obedient, okay? And you guys, in my great old age of 36, right? You know, I'm not 21, I'm not 20, I'm not 19, 22, whatever anymore. But one of the things that keeps me here and keeps me engaged is to see all the amazing things God's going to do through a lot of you, okay? Through all of you, okay? But being obedient and being faithful and trusting that if you meet God sort of where you're at, you put in the time, you put in the effort, he's going to do some amazing things in your lives, folks. And you're going to email me 3, 4, 5 years from now and say, hey, listen, this is what God's doing. And it's going to be it's going to be a great encouragement to people like myself Dr. Lewis, Dr. Knight, and other people too. Okay? So I want to leave some time. We've got till 2:15. Okay? And those of you who have been in class with me know I'm not good at letting people out early. So if I want to leave some time for some questions, you can ask me. It could be about the movement itself. It could be about some of the stuff we're doing this semester. It could even be about how to navigate some of those dynamics that are a bit tricky. Okay? To be quite honest. But yeah, I want to leave some time for questions. So if anybody has questions, feel free to ask questions now. You guys don't want to hear me talk anymore.
You touched on funding, but you didn't really accentuate that. You didn't really talk too much about funding. How do you go about funding that?
Well, so here's the thing. I mean, in a lot of our areas, if you're in the sort of the behavioral sciences, social sciences perspective, or even in ministry in some way, shape, or form, formal ministry, funding is always an issue, right? So if you're going to start up an organization, or if even you don't have an organization, but for example, if you've heard of the Hearts of Jackson ministry, right, which a lot of you guys that I see here, you were at the concert the other night on Friday, where they shared about their ministry to some of the strip clubs, right? They're not a formal organization. They don't have a place where they funnel their funding or anything like that. But to be able to go and provide care packages to women and have these conversations with people, they just went the other night. I just got an update from my wife. But to be able to do those things, you've got to figure out how to fund that. So it can come out of your own pocket. You can ask for donations. You can do whatever. But if God grows it and He expands the vision that you have, so instead of just doing a conference or just doing visits, you want to do something bigger, then at some point it exceeds your capacity in terms of what you've already got. You know, and so you've got to think of creative ways, whether that's looking through for grants, that's developing partnerships with individuals that are, you know, generous, or you know, other organizations that are philanthropic in nature that are able to give to some of these causes. That's sort of the extent of it at this point, David. And it's in progress as well. Yeah, what about the rest of you? What other questions do you have? No other questions whatsoever. Yeah?
I don't really know how to word this, but
Sure.
how did you find a place to be able to go to Cambodia? Did you go with a group? Did you go with a group of friends?
Yeah. To be really honest with you, I mean, when I was hired and that was something I was interested in, and Dr. Chan from Gainey School of Business, I mentored under him my first year. Learned a lot from him, mentored under Deb Barland in Uganda, who's another great cross-cultural educator. And so this is one of the things you've got to think about while you're in college and pray through. Okay? There's a balance. I always have this talk with prospective students, particularly parents and students. Anyway, so where is the intersection, you know, in terms of you being able to make money to provide for what it is you need in the lifestyle you want to live, and serving the world around you? Where do those arcs cross? Okay? There's a lot of people who make a ton of money but are really unhappy. And there's a lot of people who serve people nonstop and don't make a lot of money and are very unhappy. So where can you find a way or an avenue? And that was one of the things for this job with me here. Like, I'm not making as much as I would have if I were practicing law, by any stretch of the imagination. But for me to be able to go in January with students to Cambodia and see what God's working on in their lives and what He's doing there, you got to think about what are the things you feel called to do. And then when I was a student, I would always do, I'd do job searches, I would do internship searches, I would look for all types of things that would position me in a strategic way to do what I felt God was calling me to do. Right? Now, I'm telling you this, I'm a control freak sometimes. As you can tell with the trust thing, just in case you couldn't tell. And for me, I always had my life planned out. I always knew what I wanted to do. For those of you that are like that, you're in for a shock, right? It's not going to be what you always thought it would be. For some of you, it might be. But God's going to really do some amazing things in your life if you're open to what He's got for you. That's going to be even better than the best laid plans that you had. Right? So think about, while you're in college, how can you position yourself to do those types of things that you feel called to do later on? How can you prepare yourself now? This is a time of preparation, folks. I mean, this isn't, I tell students, as soon as you can get outside of this mindset or this mentality that you're here because you're forced to be here, you know, and oh, I've got to do that paper for Norwood, oh my God. Like, no, like this is an opportunity to learn, okay? To become a better writer, to become more versed, because I've got the benefit of already graduating from college and almost all my 10 years of grad school, or whatever the heck it is now, okay? When you get past this, you look back and hindsight's 20/20. I see what classes I took. I see what missions trips I went on, what cross-cultural trips. I see how God's pulled those things together and used those things. You guys are still trudging through it now. You're wondering, like, why do I have to do this stuff? It's just totally not. I have no idea how, you know, why this is even going to matter or help or whatever. I'm telling you that by faith, you've got to trust in the promises God's made to you. That you're here for a reason, you're going through this for a reason, and He's preparing you for some really great things. That in my case, were better than He even laid out for me. They're better than anything I could have laid out. Okay? So I trust in those things, and that's sort of the way I would go about answering that long answer. Sorry.